Good morning, everyone. This is Jennifer Lister, and I'm the VP of Risk Management and Claims Advocacy for Florida Insurance Trust. I will be discussing today Hurricane Irma and its impact on FIT, and also general risk management information on hurricane preparedness. I also have with me today Tony Ittori, who is the Chief Operating Officer with Disaster Strategies and Ideas Group, and he will be discussing the disaster process, public assistance, and suggestions for effective recovery. In order for the webinar to have the best impact, we do ask that all questions, or we will answer all questions at the end of the presentation. Excuse me. To ask a question, simply click on the question box that's in the middle right-hand sidebar. You'll see it right there. You can ask your question, and at the end, we will go over everyone's questions. Also, at the end of the presentation today, we will be picking 3 people for our Hurricane Raffle giveaway, and we have 3 great prizes valued at $100 each. The first prize is a Power Pro 1,000-watt portable generator, and then we are also giving away 2 hurricane preparedness kits that include flashlights, lanterns, stick-ons, first aid kit. So there's 3 prizes in total. At the end of the presentation, we won't be giving the winners. We will be sending out a member alert probably within the next 2 to 3 days with those winners listed. So let's go ahead and get started. As I stated, we are going to be talking about hurricane preparedness, and one of those things is we want to talk about the past, what has happened. For Hurricane Irma, which was the most recent storm we've had, effective 5/7 of 18, which was approximately last week, it had received 280 property claims. 91 of those claims were reported within the first week of the storm. So kudos to those members that were reporting it quickly and timely, because that is very important. We had 50 members that were affected, that had multiple locations affected, and the good news is much of that damage was minimal, with only several large loss claims. Curtis Hicks is our dedicated FIT property adjuster, and you will see on the screen all his contact information. Now, Curtis, his position is he triages all of the property claims, and he assists members with the proper avenues to take in order to correct that damage, to get you back to where you are before the storm. You'll see that Curtis has his cell phone listed up there. Curtis is very responsive, and he answers that cell phone. If you do get voicemail, he will answer you that same day or within 24 hours. We had received many compliments on Curtis' responsiveness during the storm because, as you know, that's a stressful time, and he is very good about being responsive to everyone. Now, what we're doing, or what FIT wanted to do during Hurricane Irma, because we had so much notice for the storm, we almost had a week ahead of time that we knew that it was going to hit. And FIT as an organization had many conference calls and meetings with the FIT board, which, as you know, consists of members. And we asked them, what can we do? What can we help in preparing our members for this storm? And some of the ideas that came about, we had which was our FIT alerts, where we were sending out alerts to all our members, both before and after the storm, with the claim reporting information, helpful tips on what to do before and after the storm, and we did receive a lot of positive feedback with that. And if you have suggestions as members, we are always open. If there was something that you found that maybe you think would be helpful, when a future storm does come, please always contact us because we want to help out as much as we can. Now, as you know, for a hurricane and when a hurricane is coming, preparation is key. And one of the major things that we think is beneficial for members is to have a hurricane action plan, but not just before the storm, but after too, of what needs to be done. It's important to devote appropriate personnel and financial resources to the plan, and also to assign an individual, or if your organization is very big, a committee with the appropriate authority to lead that preparedness effort. Because that board is going to have to cover many different things, or committee, because they need to kind of review what is industry's best practices when preparing for a storm. That group, that individual, or that committee, when they're looking at preparing for the storm, they should ensure that there's sufficient communication systems, that there's proper emergency supplies on site on the different locations. They need to review the insurance policies, make sure everything is up to date and that they're properly covered. Evaluate the information technology, make sure backup mechanisms are in place, and also to coordinate with local emergency response teams so they know what they're doing. Now, one of the suggestions that we have for members is to actually compile a hurricane preparedness kit. And in that kit, have blueprints for the key facilities, have the list of emergency contacts, not only just inside the organization, but outside the organization as well, fire, police departments, and ensure that your employees know where that kit is located so that when a storm is coming, that they can get that kit out and have all the information right at their fingertips. So that you want to confirm that the employees are familiar with the organization response plan, and you might even go as far as to schedule a drill to test that hurricane preparedness. Test those phone numbers, make sure they're all up to date and that everyone is on the same page. You want to make that development of that implementation of that hurricane plan a priority because the key, of course, is to outline a strategic hurricane action plan. So it's very important that everyone have that information so no one's caught off guard, unprepared. And you also don't want to wait until, okay, a hurricane is coming and now we only have 5 days to do all this. We need to prepare beforehand. So the next thing is, okay, a hurricane has come. Now you have those kits, you have your hurricane action plan, start implementing it, putting it into action. So you're going to have the before and the after. Now, one of the key things is after that storm is you report your claims to the carrier. I can't stress the importance of getting those claims in as soon as possible. There is nothing wrong with, after the storm, you know that there's damage. Maybe you don't know the extent of that damage. Still report that claim, and in the information of what the loss is, you can put to be determined. Simply TBD, to be determined, because you know that there's damage. You know a property person needs to come out and look at it. Get that claim in so everybody can start working quickly. Communication is also key between the property adjuster and the member, because we need to work as a team to get you back to what you were before that storm occurred. And as I said, you have Curtis Hicks, a dedicated fit property adjuster, who will help you through that process to get you the information that you need. And also, depending on the extent of this storm and how much damage there is, you might need assistance through the organization FEMA, and that's who I have with me today is Tony Attori, who's with Disaster Strategies, and he can kind of help walk through that process. And FIT does have a discounted rate for our members, so we have this great partnership and with this wealth of information. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Tony, and Tony, you can kind of take it from there.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. That was some really good information to start with. Okay. Which one?
Bear with us 1 second.
I'm figuring out how to use the machine. Okay. All right. Well, we've all been through some hurricanes, and normally when we think about a hurricane and preparing for a hurricane, we think about gathering supplies and water and seeking shelter. But the response to the storm will last a few days or a week. The recovery can last months or years. So recovery is really the nuts and bolts of a disaster. FIT members, as mostly small nonprofit businesses, can incur damages that could be quite impactful. A $20,000 loss for a FIT member could be much more impactful than a $2 million loss for a big county. So understanding and being prepared for the recovery process is critical for your finances and for your stability of the organization moving forward. What we're going to do today is cover some of the basics of the state and federal disaster processes with an eye towards maximizing the federal recovery dollars that your organizations can receive and trying to ensure that you're best prepared when a disaster does hit. Just a bit of brief information about my company and who I am. DSI has been in existence since 2003 when we were founded by our former director of the Florida Division of Emergency Management, Joe Myers. Joe was brought to Florida after Hurricane Andrew by Governor Childs to lead the Florida Emergency Management Division and he created the gold standard in the United States for emergency management divisions. He left in 2004 and created 2003 and created DSI, and since 2009 we have been the contractor to the state of Florida for all disasters. This means that when a storm hits, DSI staff put on state CERT, State Emergency Response Team shirts, and went out to the counties and assisted the counties with assessing their damages and developing projects to receive your reimbursements from FEMA. Unfortunately, for some reason, the state has decided in 2017 that they were not going to follow that model any longer. And they no longer sent DSI or any other staff into the field to work with counties, cities, or nonprofit entities such as yourselves to help them assess the damages and develop their projects. They call it a new model where FEMA is mostly calling the shots and DEM has very limited involvement outside the Joint Field Office. Just a little bit about me, so you know that you may be able to believe what I'm telling you. I was the general counsel of DEM for 2 years through the Deepwater Horizon disaster. I was activated for 120 straight days in Deepwater Horizon. It was not very fun, but it was very interesting. I've been the general counsel of DSI for 6 years, and for the last year, I've been the chief operating officer. I've been a lawyer for 20 years and attended University of Michigan Law School. I've also been a DEP environmental enforcement attorney. I was the state of Florida's tobacco pilot program attorney after the $1 billion settlement was made back in 1999. Okay. DSI's history with the FIT. Last fall, we worked with Jennifer and her team, and DSI made a presentation at the FIT conference that focused on the eligibility of FIT members for federal recovery dollars after Irma. There have been a lot of questions about who was eligible for what, and we came in and tried to at least provide a little bit of education on how much money can be received and when it could be received. So we received inquiries from about 25 FIT members, and we represent 20 FIT members, maybe 21 FIT members, with regard to their FEMA claims for Hurricane Irma. This representation is ongoing. Most of the damage claims have already been developed and submitted to FEMA. And we suggest that hiring a firm like us or one of our competitors would be a good idea moving forward, and we'll cover this down the road, as 75% of the costs of DSI or a firm like ours are covered by FEMA as direct administrative costs. Your staff have other things to do, other jobs, so it's good to bring in contractors to handle this very complex bureaucratic process. And finally, we've had to file a couple of appeals for some larger FIT members, and that's what we do. We will assist you till the end until your federal recovery dollars are received. Unfortunately, at this point, no FIT members have received any money from Irma to my knowledge. And indeed, only 1% of the funds from Irma, less than $1 million, I believe, have been distributed by the state. Even though many of the projects are obligated by FEMA, obligation just means that FEMA provides the funds to DEM in their SmartLink account, their federal funds account. DEM, once they have the funds, go through another entirely separate process called the Request for Reimbursement process, RFR process. So an entity such as a FIT member will have to request the reimbursement, and then the state of Florida will do a complete audit review of all the claim with every piece of documentation before the funds are released. And it's not clear how they're prioritizing the claims that they're working on. So right now, very little Irma funds have been distributed. It's unfortunate, but that's just the way the system works. Okay, what is a disaster? We see floods on TV. They were on the Weather Channel this morning, and we see high winds and people suffering. But what is actually a disaster in the United States, technically? Well, in 1998, the United States, we sort of came out of the civil defense mode and preparing for nuclear war, and the Robert T. Stafford Disaster Relief Act was passed. It created a system by which disasters are declared and recovery funds are provided across the United States. And the disasters do not depend on if anyone is injured or killed. What it depends on is the amount of damage in a certain area. So there are state and county thresholds that must be met in order for a disaster to be declared. So in 2018, the statewide threshold per capita is $1.46. That means if Florida has 20 million people, let's say, at $1.46, that means you're going to need, about $24 million, $25 million of damage across the state in order for a disaster to be declared by the federal government. We also have a county threshold, which for 2018 is $3.68. That means in addition to the state threshold, the county threshold also has to be met. So So the damages in that jurisdiction also have to exceed $3.68 per person. And so that is what a disaster is in the United States. It's if certain damage thresholds have been met, not how much devastation it looks like on TV or how many people have been injured or killed. Okay, what happens in Florida when there's a disaster or some sort of threatening situation, weather or otherwise? Well, what Florida will do is the Florida governor, and I've had to write many of these executive orders in the past when I was general counsel at DEM, will develop an executive order that's specific to the storm, and usually these are issued pre-landfall. So it's issued before the storm even hits. And an executive order, it revises rights and responsibilities of governmental entities, but most importantly what it does is that it eliminates formal procurement requirements during the pendency of the executive order. So in order to get reimbursed by FEMA for your costs, when you hire a contractor, those contractors need to be procured appropriately according to state and federal law and your own policies. We're going to cover that a little later. But when an executive order is issued, that means that those policies are suspended, and you can do whatever is necessary to protect life and property, and those costs will be reimbursed, and the lack of formal procurement will not be held as a debt, not be held against you. That's important to know. That's the most important aspect of a Florida executive order. So, for instance, the Irma executive order, I mean, it was issued, as Jennifer mentioned, well ahead of time of the storm. We knew it was coming. So there was a long period of time, maybe 5 or 6 days, maybe even a week, for you to take actions, even if you had failed to do it, failed to prepare, get a generator ready, failed to get extra staff prepared. You could have done it in this week without formal procurement just because you knew the storm was coming. And that's the most important thing to know about the Florida executive order. It gives you latitude to do what you have to do for the storm without risk of those costs not being reimbursed. Now, when the executive order is complete, those non-formally procured contracts are no longer to be reimbursed. You're going to have to take steps to formally procure them. But while the executive order is in place, and oftentimes they are renewed once or twice after a storm, this certainly was for Irma, you can do what you need to do in order to protect your property and your clients. Okay, so that's what happens in Florida. What happens on the federal level? On federal level, pursuant to the Stafford Act, after an event occurs, a state can seek a major disaster declaration. We have to, and I've written these letters in the past, it's a very detailed, many-page letter documenting the damages and the storm history and anything related to the event has to be revealed to FEMA, and it's actually approved by the president eventually. When an area is declared for public assistance, the local governments in that area, as well as PNPs, private, non-for-profit entities such as yourselves, will be eligible for federal reimbursement, usually 75% of your costs to respond to and recover from the disaster. In some disasters, it's higher. For instance, for Hurricane Irma, the FEMA said it would be 100% reimbursement for Category B expenses for the first 30 days. For instance, for Hurricane Katrina was a 100% storm. The federal government paid 100% of all the costs. And 2004-2005 hurricane season, when we had many storms, several of those storms were 90% storms because the burden was so high on the state and local governments. But normally it is 75%. And of that 75%, the federal government paid the 75%, and local governments in Florida have to pay 12.5%, half of the remaining 25%, because the state will pay 12.5%. But for PNP such as yourself, you will have to pay the whole 25% not covered by the federal government. The public assistance, and we're going to cover this in much more detail later in the presentation, is broken into categories A through G, but for FIT members, categories A, B, and E are most important. And category A, we'll see, is debris, B is emergency protective measures, and E is damages to buildings and structures. Although it's not what DSI does, and it's not what we're really expert in, I wanted to cover individual assistance because it's important to know the difference between individual assistance and public assistance. When FEMA issues disaster declarations, or the federal government issues disaster declarations, therefore PA, public assistance, or IA, individual assistance. Sometimes different counties are in each declaration. Like maybe there was a lot of homes damaged in a certain area, but the public infrastructure wasn't so damaged, so they can get an IA declaration. What's much more common is that an area will get a PA declaration and not an IA declaration. So what is IA? IA is assistance to individuals. It's temporary housing, housing vouchers, housing repair, food assistance. And these are all things under something called the Individual and Households Program. Now, many people think FEMA is going to come in and save the day after a storm. The reality is that the most money any individual can ever get from FEMA is $31,400. So no matter how much your uninsured losses were, the most FEMA is ever going to give you is $31,000. That's it. You could have lost everything. The state plays almost no role in the individual assistance process. It's purely FEMA driven. There are no state contractors. It's not something the DSI has done. It's all done on the federal level. But it is important to understand that everything IA and PA. The PA declaration is what's going to affect the FIT members. Okay, well, feel free to write down any questions you have about what we've covered about the state or federal disaster process. And now we're going to move on to a little bit more of a detailed discussion on public assistance and how FIT members can maximize the funds they get in the wake of a disaster. Okay, hurricanes hit, you have damages. What now? As Jennifer said, report your claims immediately. And to the extent that they're covered by insurance, that's going to be the first bite of the apple. If you're covered by insurance, FEMA's not going to cover it, but FEMA will cover your deductibles if it's an eligible damages. So file your claims quickly. If the storm was serious enough, a major disaster declaration will be declared after the state requests it. And if your county is included, if it's for public assistance in the county in which you're located, you can potentially receive FEMA recovery dollars. The first step in the process is to file a request for public assistance. So any FIT members that received damages, incurred damages in Irma, that wanted to receive some FEMA dollars, had to file an RPA. This is the first step, and it's very important that you are as detailed and specific as possible concerning the damages that you've incurred and the facilities that were damaged in this document. Unfortunately, we had a couple FIT members after Irma that submitted their damages on the RPA, but it was not very complete. And FEMA did deny those claims. We've appealed those claims, and we think we're going to win those appeals. But it's just because the RPA was inartfully submitted. Perhaps we should have provided some more assistance, but it's usually something that's done by the applicant themselves. And it is something we can fix an appeal. But the point here is be as complete and accurate and detailed when you submit your RPA as possible, because that will make the rest of the process much smoother. Okay, there's a lot of eligible private not-for-profit entities that are eligible for FEMA dollars. It's a long list. We found that most of the FIT members are eligible in one way or another. So community centers, museums, libraries, art services, child care, rehab centers, all eligible. The list is really quite long. What is not included is vocational or job training facilities, athletic facilities, and cemeteries. It's complicated. It would be very complicated to cover what is included and what isn't included precisely here, but this one bullet, the long bullet, sort of gives an example. So custodial care facilities and museums, administrative and support buildings are eligible. But if it's not one of those things, an administrative support building may not be eligible if it's not critical to the facility's operation. It's confusing. And I didn't really state it very well, but it's confusing, and it's something that we could assist you down the road when you are impacted. But the main point here is that most of the FIT members are eligible. We have not encountered one that is not eligible thus far. Damages. The most important thing to get federal recovery dollars is to document. The damages must be documented. The expenses must be documented. The FEMA process favors the prepared, so ensuring your expenses are carefully documented, even in the heat of the event, is extremely important. As Jennifer suggested, it might be a great idea for each of you to have a disaster team. It's our suggestion that you put an accounting or finance person on that team. Even if they have no role in assisting your patients or gathering water, have them there and document all the monies that are spent, all the actions that you take. And that's how you're going to get reimbursed. Not trying to recreate it down the road, remembering what you did 3 months earlier. Do it contemporaneously for someone who's in the accounting or finance field department, and the likelihood of your damages being reimbursed is exponentially higher. Okay, as we mentioned earlier, the damages that FIT members are likely to incur are going to be in 3 categories, A, B, and E. Let's go over Category A. Category A is debris. Debris costs and Category A projects are traditionally the largest projects in any storm. no matter what kind of facility you have, you're likely going to have some debris costs after even a smaller disaster. So, for instance, for Hurricane Irma, even as the storm was hitting, the federal government declared the entire state eligible for Category A and B expenses. That means even in areas that were just very marginally hit, if they had debris costs that exceeded the minimum project amount of $3,140, they could be reimbursed for those expenses. So 75% of the cost of cleaning up your property, essentially, can be reimbursed by FEMA. As I said, as long as the minimum project amount, you can receive those funds back. Now, I do suggest that you have a contract in place to deal with this. You do not want to send your staff out or be dealing with other important issues to pick up the debris after a storm hits. Develop a standby contract with a firm, a landscaping firm, something that they're ready to respond when the storm hits. They can pick up your debris and provide you with accurate invoices of what was done. And that is something that you should do prior to the storm. Procure that properly, because those costs could exceed the amount for which formal procurement is required. So I suggest you procure some sort of an entity to help you with your debris if you have a significant size facility after a storm. It's an excellent idea to be prepared for the storm. All right, Category B. We found that a lot of FIT members have extensive Category B costs because you have to deal with your clients. Your patients have to be taken care of in the storm, and their health is paramount. So any costs that you have in getting ready for the storm, removing floodwater, or after the storm hits, removing floodwater, operating generators, relocating patients, obtaining supplies, these costs can all be recovered. And most importantly, your extraordinary labor costs can also be recovered. We're going to cover this a little later. Labor is often the largest category of expenses in a disaster, and documenting your labor costs is extremely important. Like as the last bullet shows, the precautions you take for a storm will likely be reimbursed. Most of those, if it's taken in direct response to the approaching storm, FEMA will likely pay you 75% of those costs. All right, Category E, buildings. We had several FIT members that did have Category E damages in Irma. Structures that are damaged, if it's not covered by insurance, FEMA will cover it. If it's in a building that's eligible for reimbursement. And if insurance did cover it, FEMA will cover the deductible up to 75%. And just for your own edification, the other types of projects are Category C, which is roads, D, water control structures, dams, F is for utilities, power companies usually have Category F projects, and G is parks and recreation, is sort of a catch-all category. It's possible that some FIT members could have Category G projects. It's unlikely. We haven't seen any, but it is possible. The FEMA process is complex, very complex. This is a chart of an older process. The process today has been, unfortunately, made even more complex. And FEMA, what is FEMA? FEMA is usually a polyglot of contractors. FEMA, there's very few actual FEMA employees. Most FEMA people that you'll see in the field are contractors from one firm or another. So what we usually have here are contractors on FEMA side and contractors on the applicant side. So it gets quite convoluted. Unfortunately, the more convoluted the process, the better the contractors do, but I'm not sure the better the applicants do. FEMA and the state have been talking about how the new process instituted last year will lead to applicants receiving their recovery funds more quickly. That does not seem accurate, given what I said earlier about the Irma and Matthew intervened funds. So this is the kind of process you're going to have to navigate after a storm, which is another reason why you may want to consider hiring a consultant to handle it for you. As you can see, there's a demanding process, and it will require your staff time to navigate, and FEMA is not easy to work with. FEMA staff will rotate out. For some of the FIT members, we're on our third or fourth or even fifth group of FEMA staff for Irma. they'll roll in, they'll work for 3 months, and then they'll roll out. So it's a lot of times the only certain aspect of the entire process is your consultant who has been with you the entire time, because FEMA people, process, and personnel will change. Okay, so how does FEMA help you manage these grants? For about the last 10 years, something I mentioned earlier, something in the Stafford Act includes direct administrative costs. This means costs that were incurred in direct relation to the development of a project are reimbursable by FEMA just as disaster costs. So 75% of the time your own staff spends on the development of recovery projects, or the time, 75% of the cost of the time that contractors spend on the projects, can be reimbursed with FEMA, and those funds will be provided to you when your project is funded. So many people don't recognize that your own staff time is also reimbursable on these projects. So if you have a staff dedicated to reconciling invoices or gathering documents for a consultant or for FEMA, that time should be tracked, because you can also recover 75% of the cost of that time for the development of the projects. Since the DAC has come into play, the FEMA recovery world has changed, and almost every applicant now has a consultant. Now, if you have very minimal damages and not too concerned about FEMA trying to limit how much recovery funds you're going to give you, then maybe you want to go it alone. But otherwise, since 75% of the costs are going to be paid by FEMA, it's probably an intelligent investment from a cost perspective to hire a consultant, because not only will they take care of the process for you, but hopefully we will also assist you in identifying additional types of damages and claims that you may not even have considered. And we certainly have found that to be the case with our representation of the FIP members over the last 6 or 8 months. Okay, so as you can see, the FEMA bureaucratic process is nightmarish, and some of you have probably experienced that firsthand. I'm sure you have. We're just trying to provide you with a little information so you're best prepared as possible to maximize your dollars when you have the opportunity. Okay, what are some of the ways we can be best prepared for a disaster? How do we effectively recover from a disaster? Now, we haven't talked much today about wind speeds or taking shelter or gathering water, because we're really concerned about preserving your capital and your resources. As PNPs, you are eligible for FEMA recovery money, but the process is not so easy. Let's go over a few ideas and tips that you can use to maximize the recovery dollars you will obtain from FEMA down the road. Labor policies. As I mentioned earlier, this is probably the most important thing we're going to discuss today. If you want your staff to be reimbursed for the monies that you pay your staff for bonus pay, disaster pay, extra time spent during disasters, that's fine. Put it in a policy. Make it clear. FEMA will reimburse 75% of any extraordinary pay related to a disaster, but your policy must be clear. If there's anything discretionary about your policy, FEMA is likely to deny all of those types of claims. We had several FIP members, and that has been an issue. Different categories of people get different amounts of money, and it was not clear. We tried to work backwards to try to recreate the system. It's difficult. What you wanted to pay your employees is fine. FEMA is not going to question the amount. You just need to make it clear, make it clearly stated in your labor policy, and when that labor policy is provided to FEMA or their contractors, they will review it and confirm that it's acceptable. Most straight time is not paid. FEMA's thought is that you're going to have to pay that time anyway, so we're not going to pay you that time. It's going to be the extraordinary costs. So pay particular attention in all of your labor policies to anything that has to deal with an extraordinary cost or extraordinary time spent by your staff. Next, contracting and procurement. As I said earlier, formal procurement is required when you want to receive reimbursement for the cost of your contractors. Under federal law, 2 CFR sections 200.318 through 200.326, that's called the Super Circular or the Federal Procurement Regulations. That's one standard. You also have to follow the state standard, which is more stringent in many cases than the federal standard. So the most important thing here to take away from this discussion here is that under Florida law, anything under $35,000, so $34,999 or less, those contractors can be hired with merely quotes. You can just call around and get some quotes, and as long as the person you hire is the lowest amount, that's acceptable for FEMA. And for the state of Florida, up to $34,999. Above $35,000, some sort of formal procurement process, a request for proposals, invitation to bid, some sort of form of procurement document process will be required. But up to $34,999, it won't be required. And that is how we are representing most of the FIP members. Most of our representation of FIP members is far below $34,999. We obtained quotes of other of our competitors, which are all significantly in excess of the rates we're charging the FIP members. We provide that in a little memo that's attached to the project, and that justifies our fees and our procurement with FEMA. We're finding no problem with that at all. Another point here is that if you had to do something during dependency of the executive order, then it doesn't have to be formally procured. But be careful about carrying that over until after the executive order it expires or is extinguished. So you can do what you need to do under executive order, but don't rely on that exclusively. Okay. DEM's main motto is get a plan. And all of you need to get a plan as well, as Jennifer mentioned. And one of the main reasons is that DEM's position is that you need to self-support for 3 days. And they have no policies or expectations of getting you anything in 3 days. So after a storm hits, you need to make sure that you have your water and food and anything you need for 3 days. They may be there in sooner than 3 days. You may have first responders, but I doubt that anyone from DEM or FEMA will be there within 72 hours. It's highly unlikely. Now, the first responders will be there, local fire and police, but FEMA or the state will not be there. So that's their plan, 3 days self-support. Your facility also may be damaged, and something also Jennifer mentions about having a plan, a continuity of operations plan. Every county in Florida has to have a COOP plan, and it's probably a good idea for most of you to consider a COOP plan. We did have many FIP members that had to evacuate their facilities. Some of them had to, like, one entity had to evacuate their patients from Florida to a facility in Georgia. So this stuff happens, and you do not want to have to be faced with having a bunch of clients and a facility that has no air conditioning and you have to evacuate not knowing where you have to go. So a little time pre-storm during blue sky times to consider your COOP plan is probably an excellent idea. All right, let's talk about money. Probably what most of you are interested in, and we're getting close to the end of the presentation. The money is a problem with the disasters. Less than 1% of the recovery funds from Hurricane Irma have been distributed. This storm hit, 9 months ago. So still only 1% of the money is on the street. Hermine and Matthew hit in 2016, and only about 1/3 of those funds are on the street. And it's 2 weeks from the 2018 hurricane season. So this means that although FEMA will provide you with reimbursement for these recovery costs and for your recovery contractors, you're going to have to carry these costs for a while. Even for fees and firms like DSI, you're going to have to pay us when we provide you a bill, because it is not legal for us to have a contingency contract where we only get paid if your projects are funded. That's not legal under the public assistance provisions of the Stafford Act. So you're going to have to carry these costs for a while, and it's probably a good idea for each of you to consider how you will do so. How will you carry those costs? And I know this is probably more Jennifer's area than mine. This is an important factor, because it's going to be a while before you get your funds, and you're going to not only be out the cost of the damages from the disaster, but probably the cost for your contractors, picking up your debris, compiling your damages, fixing your facilities, all those things, and you're going to be out of pocket for those funds for quite a while. Being prepared is a critical aspect of a disaster, and we follow a few simple steps. We can maximize the funds that each of you receives after a disaster. This presentation has gone pretty quickly because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions. It was a pleasure to present this material. There's my email address and my phone number. I'd be happy to take questions or emails from anyone after today on any issues we've covered or any other issues. I'd be happy to be of assistance. Right now, we're going to go back. We're going to cover the questions that were asked during the webinar.
I can't see that. Okay. One of the questions was if we are going to share the presentation to the participants. And yes, this presentation will be on the FIT website, and that should be up probably within the next week. So it will be there. But of course, if you have any questions, you can contact me directly, and I will get you the answers that you need. And then we have another question.
Okay, I see a couple. We have a question here. Do you have to pay back assistance you receive? No. Not only do you not have to pay it back, but after hurricane, de-obligation is a big concern. And there's a lot of horror stories out there about FEMA coming back years after a storm and clawing back funds that were provided to a jurisdiction after a storm because some technical aspect of the recovery process was not followed precisely. Well, after Hurricane Sandy, Congress included a new provision in the Stafford Act called 705C. And Section 705C of the Stafford Act provides that if funds are provided pursuant to a written agreement, the costs were reasonable, and the purpose of the agreement of the grant was accomplished, that FEMA cannot take those funds back. So basically, Congress has created an affirmative defense for you to use in any appeal if FEMA attempts to take back your monies. So it's less likely now than ever that any assistance you receive will ever be taken back. Okay, another question. Do the debris removal contractors have to be FEMA certified? No. No, there is no FEMA certification process for debris removal contractors. And we actually recommend, through our recent experience, that you develop relationships and contracts with local entities. We found that these big firms, DRC and other big debris firms that operate state and nationwide, what they basically do is sell you a bill of goods. They really don't have the staff in Florida. As we saw after Irma, all these companies had all these standby contracts across the state, and none of them could perform. They all relied on the same subcontractors, and then there was bidding wars between the different subcontractors. So almost all the contractors went to Miami and Monroe, where they were making twice as much per ton on the debris that they had already contracted for in Sumter County, for instance. So it's less likely that those sorts of actions will occur if you negotiate standby contracts with local firms. Those local landscaping or debris firms, their costs are just as reimbursable from FEMA as some big company that has experience with FEMA. So we think that's an excellent idea. And these local firms are most likely going to be much more responsive to your needs and want you as for continuing business. So no, they do not need to be FEMA certified. And indeed, we recommend you work with some local entities.
That's all the questions.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's all the questions we have. Thank you, Tony. That presentation is insightful and I think very, very informative. So thank you for that. And for everyone that joined us, thank you for attending today. And as I said, the presentation will be on our FIT website shortly. And also we will be sending out an alert with our winners, our Hurricane Preparedness Kit winners, within the next week and coming out soon. So thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.